Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Behavioral Health Echo series. This is a training brought to you by the Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring CSTAT, a division of the Be Well Texas Institute here at UT Health San Antonio. So again, we want to thank all of you for being here and supporting this program. Today we have Dee-Dee Stout presenting on stages of change and the Transtheoretical Model. And this is a topic that some of you requested, and it's also an important part of our behavioral health curricula. So we thought it would be important to bring it to you. And who will be better to discuss the Transtheoretical Model than Dee-Dee Stout, who has written about it and presented on it so many times. So thank you, Dee-Dee, for doing this for us. But before we start with our presentation, I wanted to briefly remind you that if you want to review this session, you can go to our Be Well Texas YouTube page and revisit the content of this class anytime you want. Also, I know that some of you like captioning, so you know exactly how to do it. You just go to the bottom part of our Zoom windows and click on the captioning feature. And remember that there is a post-session survey that we will distribute after this class. We will send to you via email, so please make sure that you answer that survey. When you do that, you will be qualifying for a $30 gift card as well. And this session will work as follows. We are going to start with a 25-minute didactic presentation by Dee-Dee, and then we will open the floor to your questions. After that, we will move to the second part. We will be discussing a case presented by one of you, someone from our community of learners. And this is your opportunity to participate, to express your opinions, your views about the case. Remember, one of the goals of this session is to have our case presenter leaving with at least one or two new strategies on how to manage the case. So we encourage your participation during the case discussion. So all you have to do is raise your hands and we'll get to each one of you as we move through the class. So now let's start with our introductions. And let's start with Dr. Antoine. How is the weather in Baltimore?
Yes, it's good to be here again. The weather in Baltimore is up and down today. It's not too hot, but we'll wait a couple hours and see what happens. It's good to be here as well. For those who haven't seen me before, I'm a psychiatrist by training, but working at the Addiction Treatment Services program at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore and run a few other programs in the area. So looking forward to discussing the case today.
Thank you. Dr. Aguilar.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Clarissa Aguilar. I'm the Director of Psychology and Training at the Center for Healthcare Services, the local mental health authority here in Bexar County. We do integrated primary care here at the center and serve patients or approach patients with the whole health perspective, trying to achieve recovery in both substance use, mental health, and physical health care as well. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. And our case presenter, Sabrina. Could you introduce yourself to the group, please?
Hi, my name is Sabrina Vera. I'm an LPC, LCDCI from the rural area. Well, I'm working with family service.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting a case for us. And our program coordinator, Jasmine Vidal, could you introduce yourself to the group, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Vidal, and I'm the program coordinator. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy today's session.
Right, so now I think that we can move to our speaker of the day, Dee-Dee Stout. If you could briefly introduce yourself, and I think that we are ready to start with your presentation.
Okay. So, hello, I'm Dee-Dee Stout, and I'm here from the Bay Area in California, where our weather is up and down a lot too. Sadly, our fire season has already begun a couple months early, and it is not good. I am locally a practitioner where my practice includes families, individuals, and couples with some sort of addiction or what we today would call a substance use disorder in there. I'm also an adjunct associate professor at St. Mary's College over in Moraga, where I teach courses on motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, and substance use disorders. I have been working in the field for nearly 40 years, have been teaching for 35 of those. It feels like a very long time. I guess it is, huh? And I'm delighted to talk about the stages of change because it intersects with two of my other favorite things that you've heard me speak on, and that's motivational interviewing and harm reduction psychotherapy. So again, stages of change is at the core of a lot of these other modalities that we use. Sadly, sometimes we use stages of change incorrectly. So that's one of the things I'm here to talk about today. So
All
somebody
right.
can see my slides, that would be great.
Yes, we're going to start right now sharing your didactics.
And you can just move to the next slides. And no disclosures, next slide. And learning objectives, next slide. Okay, so few things to keep in mind as we go through here. One, the stages of change, you're going to see me abbreviated as SOC, are not linear. A lot of people began to see them as linear because of the models that were used. The other model that was used a lot was the pie chart that we saw. Even the developers don't use that anymore. So they now use a spiral, and I've got a picture of that later on. We don't ever stage the person. We can only stage the behavior, and each behavior that someone is working on can be at a different stage. This is the tricky part of the stages of change. And again, yes, it can be called the Transtheoretical Model, TTM. That's sort of the official title of this, but everyone now calls it the stages of change. All of these, I'd like you to keep in mind, are normal responses. So this is not pathological in any way. So we don't use this as a diagnostic tool there's no entry in the DSM that says stages of change. And this is part of the reason because people can't be staged. So we'll talk about PACE later, and we'll keep in mind. Next slide, please. A little bit of history of the stages of change. It started with Jim Prochaska in Rhode Island, and his student at the time, Carlo Di Clementi. John Norcross came on a little bit later, back in 1984. So the stages of change have been around for a long time now. We're looking at 40 years this year. It was about 1,500 smokers that they took a look at and noticed patterns within those smokers, from people who were still smoking to those who were talking about stopping to those that had a plan to stop and those that had stopped or had stopped a long time ago. And that's the reason that they are looking at, then they looked at other addictive behaviors, I should say, and put it that way. It's also how we learned about natural recovery. This idea that most people, by the time they're between 25 and 30, have stopped their problematic use of a substance. And I think we forget that when we talk about substance use a lot of time. Up to 85% of people stop all on their own. So I like to talk about that because it gives me hope, right? It's also a model of change and not a theory. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Okay, next slide. From one of my favorite mentors, the late Alan Marlatt from the University of Washington, says, we don't budget enough for change. And we don't. I'm sure we can all talk about folks who come to us seeking change of one kind or another, and they'll say, so how long is this going to take? How long am I going to have to come and see you? Or how long am I going to have to stay in program? And there's no answer to that, right? We don't know. But I can say pretty calmly that if someone has had a really deep relationship to a substance for 10, 15, 20 years, probably going to take more than just a month or 6 months before that change is really going to be made. Next slide. My experience of the stages of change is a pinball machine. And again, we can watch people go through every stage of change practically in one session, right? One conversation, doesn't even have to be a session. As they sort of, they're up over here and then down over here and then up over that way and then over at the side. That is all normal. Next slide, please. The place that we begin with the stages of change, if we're going to talk to people about the stages, is to begin with a readiness ruler. Now, some of you may remember the ruler from my talk in motivational interviewing. We use the rulers a lot for a lot of different things. So from 0 to 10, where 0 is the lowest and 10 is the highest, I might ask the client, how important is it to make this change right now? And have them give me a number and then explore that number a little bit. I can also ask them how confident they are that if they wanted to make this change right now, that they could. And again, the 0 to 10, same scale, to get a sense of where people are. If people are in the lower end, so 5, under 5, that might give me some concern that we might need to spend more time increasing the importance, talking about, what would make this more important? What would give you more confidence that you could change right now? Because a lot of times what we wind up doing with folks is having them proverbially sign on the dotted line before they're actually ready for services. A lot of that is pressure from various stakeholders, and I appreciate that. I worked in treatment, all kinds of treatment settings for a good 30 years out of my career, and I felt that pressure too. It's part of the reason, though, that people are not successful sometimes, or we could say that treatment is not successful for them because they're not in the right place where they need to be. Next slide. This is just, there's going to be changes ahead. And wouldn't it be nice in life if we got the sign? So I said, okay, hold on, slow down for a minute, take a breath because there's a big change coming. I would have appreciated that. Next slide. These are the 7 stages of change that we look at in the Transtheoretical Model. And you can see on the other side is the spiral. Okay. So try to keep that in mind as we talk about this. First stage, pre-contemplation. Second, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, termination, and then relapse and recycle. Now, sometimes when people are talking about substance use disorders, especially, they leave out termination stage. I think that's wrong. People do terminate, and I'm one of them. So, next slide, please. One of my clients, who was quite a brilliant young man, worked in IT and also a very heavy methamphetamine user. We were just shifting from the pie chart to the spiral model. And I asked him which he liked better. We went through, he was very interested all the time in what I was doing and why I was doing it. And so I shared with him. And he said, I like the spiral because no matter where I am in it, I'm still on the road. And I just thought that was brilliant. That's exactly what we want. It's for people to not say, I'm a failure because I'm not in action. Right? It's to say, or even I'm a failure because I had a recurrence of my substance use or whatever the behavior is. No, you're still on the road. As long as you're engaged, you're still on the road. And I just thought that was brilliant. So I keep that in my slide package. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we can look and help someone to determine what stage they're in, and you're going to hear me say that, yes, I have my clients figure out where they are for what behavior. It's not up to me to make that decision. And here's one of the ways we can do that, and that's with the Eureka, is what this is called, University of Rhode Island Change Assessment. And this is Jim Prochaska doing that, and probably some of his students. And you can see some of the things that you might hear when someone is in a particular stage for that behavior that you're talking about at the time. So we might say in contemplation, someone might say, I wish I had more ideas on how to solve my problem. Right? So instead of hearing that as resistance, oh, they don't want to talk about their problem, or they're not willing to work on it. No, they are. They want our help. They want people to engage with that. And I think that's important. And then in maintenance, It might be, I thought once I resolved the problem, I'd be free of it. But sometimes I find myself struggling with it. That can happen with any behavior at any time. We tend to think that it's only substance use that has that. It's like, no, that's true for all behaviors, that we will often think back to, oh gosh, I wish I could engage in this again, whatever it is. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this one. That's in there for you if you want to read more about that. Next one. And go to the stages of change format. Now, I'm not going to delve deeply into this because we don't have a lot of time. So I'm giving you the short version. But there are 2 processes, experiential and behavioral. And there are 5 tasks for people to complete in each process. Okay, so there'd be 10 altogether. Again, this is not what we usually talk about when we talk about stages of change. You heard the 7 stages, and that's usually all we ever get to. What's important about this is to try to help people to connect the change process and the task at the same time. And that's why it's important that this not be information that we're just putting in our case notes, but that we're sharing with people so that they'll have an idea of what they might be able to do to help themselves move through these stages. Next slide, please. And here we go. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to give you an easier version of it, but I wanted you to see what it looks like. The other thing that I love is you can see over here on the side that this spiral repeats. And that's the point, right? We often repeat through the cycle, which is why the developers call it a recycling rather than a relapse. They felt that relapse was going back to the beginning or pre-contemplation. And some people do that, right? They'll have a recurrence of their drug use again, and they'll say, those people are crazy. I don't have a problem. I'm not talking to anybody ever again. They're back at pre-contemplation for that behavior. Absolutely. But most people don't, especially if they're back in your office or on the phone to you or sending you an email, right? They're engaged again. So they're coming back into some stage in that. Next slide. And next slide. So what I've done is given you some of the common characteristics and then the tasks that go in here. So in the pre-contemplation stage for a behavior, you might see somebody who's feeling coerced, put upon by some of their significant others, right? Somebody is pressuring them to make this decision. Next slide. I call it the who me stage. What do you mean I have a problem? Who, me, right? And so what we want to do is to increase their knowledge or awareness of that problem. And we need to do it in a gentle way. We were really good at it back in the 80s of just telling people to sit down and shut up and I'll tell you what's wrong. That is not effective. Gratefully, I've moved out of that, even though a lot of treatment has not. But here we are looking at some other ways of doing this. So you can see, again, using motivational interviewing to ask, offer, act, for instance. So that might be a way. The big thing we want to remember is before I give people information, I want to ask for their permission. I just read an article about whatever the topic is. How about the use of medication for OUD? And I wonder if you'd be interested in that. What do you think? Right? And get their buy-in on that. If they say no, then skip it. Try it another time. Next slide. Common characteristics of contemplation, right? Contemplation just means I'm thinking about it. So there might be some distress around it. The big one here is the ambivalence. There's often a lot of ambivalence. And ambivalence is that feeling of at least 2 ways about something. Part of me wants to make a change, part of me doesn't. And again, that is perfectly normal. We used to think of that as diagnostically as part of denial. It is not. It is simply part of the stages. Next slide, please. And now you'll see some of the tasks, right? So one of the things we want to help clients to do is to talk about these areas and talk about it with emotion. We need to connect their feelings about their behavior with their behavior, not just talk about the behavior itself. That isn't quite enough to really get there. And so we might talk to them about, even if they're not concerned, they're just beginning to feel concerned about this. Who else is concerned? Who's been talking to you about this? Because it sounds like it's not just you, right? One of the things we like to do in motivational interviewing is to use personal value cards. And I've given you the links that are free for the personal value cards. Thank you, Bill Miller, who was at one time the biggest addiction researcher in the country. He's just retired. Now he's still around. But though that means everything that he did, or a lot of what he did, is free for us because it's our tax dollars that supported it. You can also just ask somebody, what do you value the most in life? Sometimes I'll ask people if they get stuck to look at their phone and show me a couple of pictures on their phone, because we all carry things that are important to us on our phones. Pictures there now. Next slide, please. Some of the common characteristics of preparation. Now I'm preparing to make this change. So I have not thought about it, pre-contemplation. I have thought about it, but I'm ambivalent. And now I'm in preparation. So I've decided that maybe it's time to make a change. So here you can see I'm intending to make the change. I'm on the verge. I'm almost there. And that also means that I'm open to planning. Right. And it's really important that we encourage people to make a personal plan for change. We can often do that by asking them about other changes they've made in their life of any kind where they've been successful. And it can be something, sort of silly. I mean, maybe they stopped eating meat, and you can say, well, what does that have to do with my substance use? Well, change is change, and we can use your strengths from there and pull them over here. A lot of people don't understand that. No. Next slide, please. So in preparation, I call it the adding an apple most days, because I do a lot of work in nutrition as well. It's that baby stepping. So a lot of times what we wind up doing is asking people to give up something, including harm reduction behavior. Yes, absolutely. Stages of change are for everybody. So if we look at adding an apple instead of taking away the potato chip, let's say, because somebody's not ready for that. Okay, well, how about adding an apple? What do you think about that? And I found most people work better when they're not coming from a state of deprivation and only talking about what you can't have or you can't do. And instead trying to turn that around and find a way to say, well, here's what you can do though, instead. We have a couple of tasks here. We actually have a whole bunch of them, but here's two of the big ones. And it's about relationships. It's about, in using 12-step language, we might look at people, places, and things, right? So we also want to look at our own role in life and take a look. Is there some role that I've taken on that might be adding to the barriers for me to make this change? I have a client I work with who feels very responsible for his family. Understandably, because he is responsible to his family. He's the primary breadwinner. And how is that helping, and how is that getting in the way of making some of the changes? Right? Next slide, please. So in action, that's the stage where we finally, quote unquote, see somebody making a change. Unfortunately, particularly in Western culture, we tend to think of that as the only thing that counts. And I like to remind my clients, those other three stages where you may not be seeing a lot of things, those are really important, because you can't get to action unless you get through those stages first. You can see in here, we've got a ton of things to do that we can help folks with. Where am I? What am I doing? Who am I with? All of this around, again, the environment that I'm in. It's going to be around stimulus control. A lot of times that means not only refusal skills, and urge surfing is one of my favorites, but it's really looking at, how do I sit with distressing feelings? Most of us are not good at that. And I always throw my hand up. I still have to work on that. Nobody likes to feel distressed and uncomfortable. Right. We do want to look at rewarding as well. That is super important when we make changes. Even those baby steps, we want to reward all the way along to build our confidence. Next slide, please. Here's some of the common characteristics of action. You know, making that decision, setting a date. You know, that's a big one. I think that we hear that a lot with smokers, you know, that are ready to set a date. Where is your quit date? And we can look at it the same way with any substance use. You know, that's a very harm reductionistic approach to it. You know, don't talk about making the change right now, but maybe in the future. When would it make sense to do that? Willing to follow suggested strategies and activities to change. So there you go. I become much more willing to participate in this. Now you'll see the little letters under there, admit, commit, and abstain. I do not mean abstaining completely from the substance. That is a possibility, of course. You can do that in action, but it doesn't have to be. It's abstaining from the problematic use of your substance or the problem behavior. Okay. Next slide, please. And how do we help folks stay in action? One of the ways is to find new places for support. And this is a real tricky one for most of my clients, I'll tell you. You know, they don't want to go to support groups. You know, that's just, again, part of this American independence thing that we got to get over. Because it's really helpful to have a group. And it doesn't have to be a 12-step group. There are lots of other opportunities out there. Next slide, please. So when somebody's getting ready to move to maintenance, what does that look like? Now, when Prochaska and DiClemente were developing the stages of change, they said the change had to be in place for at least 6 months. And so that's kind of what we look at here, okay? It's less frequent, but often intense temptations to engage in the old behavior may be faced, right? And we all know about those. I've had to give up gluten, and I can't tell you how badly I want a piece of good bread. And I live in San Francisco, essentially. So sourdough is on the top of the list. All right. Next slide, please. Ooh. Are we stuck? There we go. So our terminator here in termination, I am done. Even Nora Volkow, who is the head of NIDA, has said that for some or even many, substance use disorder is not a chronic illness. So we have to get that out of our head. Termination also needs to be a personal decision. Some people don't want to think about, I've terminated. They say, I need to work on this for the rest of my life. It's not for me to say yes or no. That's up to the person to think of it that way. We really do want to look at setbacks and not failures, recycling instead of relapse. And next slide, please. Again, we can look at the relapse recycling, that damn, it happened again, right? And here are some of the words that we might use: a lapse, a recurrence, a return to old behavior or use. There's no perfect language. Yeah, some people are fine with the old language, and there are many people who do not like the term relapse at all because of the stigma that comes with it. Next slide, please. So let's remember that people don't resist change. They resist being changed. People don't like it when we force them to do things, right? That's human nature. Next slide. And lastly, here are some of the sources. The group treatment from your own Mary Martin Velasquez, who is a colleague and a friend of mine. She is in Austin, I believe, UTA up there. And she and Carlo have done the second edition for the group treatment. But there's also a second edition for the substance use treatment and the stages of change, which is an excellent resource. And then part of this came from private conversations that I've had with Mary Martin about this, because she is a pal. And last slide. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. And I know that was a whirlwind. You know, now you feel like you've been on the spiral, huh? And there we are. So there's much more to the stages of change. And I know there were a couple of questions, so I apologize not being able to stop and get to those, but I promise I will. Thanks,
Of
Clarissa.
course, of course. Thank you, Dee-Dee. Yes, definitely. If necessary, we can go back and do a part 2, Dee-Dee, if you're open to it, because I know there's
Absolutely.
so much more to dig into this topic. Definitely. Let's see who. Let's see who has questions, and let's open the floor for questions, comments. Oh, someone says, Dee-Dee, what a powerful presentation. And as always, your insights are right on target.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for giving me the PhD, even though I haven't earned it too. But a lot of my friends feel I have with all of my training. So they've given me the honorary.
Dee-Dee, I wanted to ask, because I know all our trainings have a focus or an emphasis on substance use. Are these stages or changes, I mean, can they be applied to persons who, let's say, they're trying to reduce their gambling or their shopping or they're shopaholics?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The stages of change apply for any change. Learned helplessness. Boy, that's a whole nother topic. That's a great question.
Learned
and it really is another
helplessness.
topic. I'm going to resist the urge to get sidetracked because I could go down that road. And I see Clarissa.
We can consider it for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I still can't get that poor little rat out of my head swimming in the tank. So there you go. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your comment. Oh, here we go. Am I beneficial working with persons in the criminal justice system? Yes, I'm in the forensic and counseling psychology department. So part of what I work in is the forensic piece of that, which is criminal justice. And I've done that for a long time. There is a whole book in motivational interviewing on Am I with Offenders, if I remember the title correctly, written by a buddy of mine, Mike Clark, and somebody else. I'm sorry, I don't know who she is, who's the second author. They are working on a second edition right now. And my students found that very helpful.
Great. And also, I was going to say, we will definitely go back to the stages of changes when we go through our case in the second part. So if you want to, in the interest of time, let's just very quickly move to announcements, and then we'll go back to this when we discuss our case. So Karen, if you have the announcement for us, that'd be great. Thank you. Please remember that the Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring CSTAT offers technical assistance. So this is a service offered to all of you in the community at no cost at all. So please use it. All you have to do is go to our CSTAT page. We're sharing the link with you right now. And there is a form, a TA form, and someone will get back to you in 2-3 days. Next, please. To claim Cs for today's session, all you have to do is answer the post-session survey. You can answer the survey here while you're in the session, or you can answer it after the session. We'll send it to you along with the material that we're using in this class. And remember, in the question, are you applying for CEU credit for today's ECHO session? Please answer yes. You should be receiving your behavioral health certificates in approximately 2 or 3 weeks. Next. And at CSTAT, we're always looking for case presenters, and that is because we believe that knowledge should happen in real time with real cases. And so far, we have some great results and great experiences when we have shared your cases. So please, if you want to share your cases with us, just send us an email at cstat@utesca.edu. We'll be happy to give you options and alternatives. Next. And next month, on Friday, August the 30th, we'll have Dr. Antoine discussing cultural gaps in healthcare, strategies for effective clinical practice. Again, very easy to register. Just go to our CSTAT page and the link is there. We'll see you next month. Thank you. And now we can move to our case presentation. So Sabrina, if you can briefly walk us through your case, and then we'll open the floor for questions and suggestions from the group. Karen, if you can share her case presentation. Thank you.
Hi, okay, I think it's important that I emphasize the clients that I work with and where I'm from. So I'm from the rural area, meaning we have limited, scarce resources. I think the biggest city, which is San Antonio, is about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from where I serve my clients. I work with offenders being released from prison, federal prison with a substance abuse problem or history, which is how I received this client that I will talk about. My clients are mandated to receive services on top of paying fines, reporting, dropping aways, being employed, showing up for counseling. The client I will be presenting on is a 44-year-old Hispanic male, again referred to me for co-occurring services, substance abuse and mental health. He has been incarcerated for the last, he shares 15 years, but on paper it's over 20 years. Heavily involved with the criminal system since he was a teenager. He has a 15 out of 16 score on ACEs. Absent father, never involved. Severely neglected and abused by his mother and stepfather. He does have a speech impediment because of the severe abuse. Early onset with drugs, marijuana at 10, alcohol at 11, cocaine and methamphetamine at 15, and his drug of choice was heroin at 5, which started at 15 and used a minimum of $10 daily. OD'd in 2009 and 2010. His goals are pretty simple. He's been absent a lot, so he wants to be a better father and better husband. Follow the terms of probation, of course, avoid criminal activity and remain drug-free. Since being released and working with us, he has been able to reinstate his driver's license and find employment. Some of the strengths that he does share is he has a stable home, and after many, many years of incarceration, he remains married in a stable relationship. Some challenges that we came across at the very beginning is, again, I mentioned I'm in the role, so finding a prescribing for like a physician that would prescribe Suboxone. He was released with Suboxone from the BOP. So we ran into who can prescribe this for him, how do we get it paid for, ran into roadblocks immediately. I think we seeked out a provider who had completely shut down their program on Suboxone and having that paid for. Then they referred us out to someone 40 miles away from us, and my client was like, I just got home, I don't have the funds to get there, and how will I pay for it? So we were able to locate someone 20 miles away that would prescribe him Suboxone, but of course ran into problems again with cost of first appointment and then to include the prescription. Family Service, the agency that I work with, was able to pay for his initial cost and first prescription, and then we gave him gift cards for his second prescription cost. Since then, he has qualified for an indigent program through the hospital, through our local hospital, to cover the costs every time he has to go and see the doctor now, to continue Suboxone. Again, this only covers the cost for visits and not the Suboxone costs, the prescription costs. I come here asking, I guess, for a point of direction on like how to prescribing physicians that will actually prescribe this medication, and how do we fund it? And also, I know I mentioned my client was employed. He's maintenance at one of local convenience store. He wants to, of course, make more money, but stay locally. I did reach out to our local workforce, but they no longer do the federal bonding. So that's another area I would like to get help on, exactly like get like more opportunities for this individual.
Doesn't Be Well Texas service people all over Texas?
Excuse me, who's asking that? Because I heard someone who is asking the question?
It's Mary Helen Lopez.
Okay, Mary Helen, what is your question again?
Well, my suggestion to her was I've always been under the idea that Be Well Texas services people all over Texas. And so, you know, and she talked also about this person being dual diagnosed. So my concern also was, are their mental health needs being addressed?
It's a good question. Sabrina?
Yes, we are working with mental health and substance abuse co-occurring in session, yes.
So I would just share with you, I just recently retired, but I've been in behavioral health and forensics for over 34 years. So I worked at our jails, probation, all kinds of stuff. But my take to you is, I'm glad to hear that he has a stable home, but are they users at his home as well? Do you know?
No, ma'am. No, his
Oh, good.
he lives with wife and 2 daughters. No.
And if you don't mind, what's the diagnosis on his mental health?
Mental health?
Is it depression, anxiety?
Yes.
Okay, so he's getting medications for that.
For no, not out here, no, ma'am. I think one course that we still work on is the anxiety from being incarcerated and coming out here. So we are working on that.
Right. And that's a lot. It sounds like a lot of complex trauma, because as a child, you know, all the neglect, and then of course the prison. So, I mean, I'm just saying from just experience and observing it, that needs to be addressed as well. And I thought Be Well Texas, it can't be your primary, if I'm correct, the Be Well Texas program, it can't be where where it's a chronic acute mentally illness, where it's, you know, serious mental illness, but it doesn't sound like. But I thought that they would actually work with someone who has dual diagnosis, and where they would do video and they could mail medications as needed. So I don't know if you've ever looked into that. I know it's the primary is here in San Antonio with the school, but just that it's Be Well Texas giving this CEU, and that's not something maybe you're open to. I don't understand.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm open to.
I know.
Yes, definitely, Sabrina. We can connect with you after the class, and we will put you in touch with some of our people from our team at Be Well Texas, and we'll give you some resources. We'll take it from there. Definitely.
And my other suggestion would be is, and I know because just dealing with chronic acute mentally ill in Bear County is what I should say, for so long. Spirituality is important. And if he's from a small town, I know that, you know, community is really important. And so that would maybe be another thing that would help him, you know, and there's a lot of strengths.
Yes,
There's
ma'am.
a lot of
Actually,
strength, it sounds like.
he mentioned somebody coming up to him and reaching him about going back into the federal prisons and talking to inmates. So he did mention that in session.
Yes. So even if it's his, I don't know what, you know, if he's Christian or whatever it is, but just getting in community like that. Usually, at least here in Bear County, there's a lot of stuff that's faith-based for, you know, persons who are formerly incarcerated. And even there are persons that are involved in faith-based with mental health. So you may not have that there in that rural area, but I know that churches are becoming a lot more open to being part of those types of issues with, you know, persons that attend their services. And that may be something that you look into to find out.
Okay, thank you,
Or
Mary.
I don't know what you have for reentry also.
Thank you for your suggestions, Mary Helen. Anyone in the
Sure.
group? Anyone
Sabrina, I
has
was
a
just gonna
question?
say, you're doing a lot of great work with this individual. And it's great to hear that you're looking for how to support them even further. I think as you get connected with the resources in the area, I'm in Baltimore, obviously, so I may not know the nuances. I think it's really going to be a great question to the individual you're working with to say, what's the priority of where you want to start? Because there are so many complex issues, as was just brought up, from trauma to mental health. It could be an opportunity to flood things. And I say sometimes jokingly, but it could always occur if you try to push everything at the same time. You get an anti-contemplative approach where a person just runs in the other direction. But you're doing a lot of great work. I think it's an opportunity to prioritize everything and make sure it's sustainable. Telehealth is great, but you can't mail buprenorphine for a long period of time without a face-to-face visit. So I know there's some barriers there that you'll have to prioritize with that individual and make sure they work out. But it's good to hear that you're also considering the mental health. That's a portion that I think could be valuable for them as well.
Thank you, Dr. Antoine. And I think our program director, Dr. Adrian Lindsay, wanted to say something. Dr. Lindsay, if you want to unmute yourself.
I apologize. I'm work from home today, so if there's any background noise, I apologize. I just wanted to mention, yes, we do treat patients anywhere in Texas. They can be dual diagnosed, of course, but primary SUD needs to be the primary diagnosis. And to the other question, we can also mail medications anywhere in the state. And for patients that meet the financial criteria, they may have grant funded services as well, and free services.
All right, thank you. And then someone here says Recovery Texas also provides free virtual peer support for Texans. If
Oh,
you
that's
would
great.
be interested in having extra support from someone with lived experience in recovery, that's Recovery Texas. Any questions or comments from the group?
You're also going to find, Sabrina, that you've got everything from 12-step to smart recovery to, all sorts of different groups that are going to be online and offer support. And I try to, and I know this is a touchy subject, for I said for my own client, it said you can go in and you can turn your camera off, you can call yourself, Mickey Mouse. It doesn't matter, and just lurk, and see what it feels like. You do not have to feel like you have to share. And maybe that's something, because if his wife is part of the support, that she would even be willing to sit with him and kind of hold his hand, maybe literally, as he goes through that, and just tries out some different mutual support groups to see what seems to feel right for him. And I just want to also add on to Dennis's comment that you are doing great work. I mean, this is a very complicated case, as you well know, and so does he.
Yeah.
So one thing that we all noticed while we were in the pre-session meeting, Sabrina, discussing the case, positive point, and our opinion, is that his companion, his wife, has been with him throughout his incarceration period and until today. I'm sure that that's something that you could leverage and use as well during your conversations with him, I'm sure.
Yes, he mentions over and over how blessed he is.
No.
That's great. All right. And he seems to be happy with the fact that he has an employment, correct?
He is happy. He just would like higher paying, definitely.
And
Terry also asked if there are any cultural considerations with either the mental health piece or the substance use piece maybe both, pros and cons to that, barriers and things that help him to access.
I think the thing that struck us, and it was said earlier as well, like given the history, we could probably think of a few diagnoses where it's like, hey, PTSD or something's going on. Do you feel like he is hesitant to talk about those in any way, or is he pretty open in your conversations with you?
No, at first of course they're mandated, so he was like, I don't know why I'm here. Counselors suck. They've never helped me, et cetera, until he was like, okay, maybe this agency does want to help me. They're seeking all these places that could help me. They're helping me with my doctor's visits. So he's actually very open, will talk to me about some of his abuse as a child.
And I think that's that's where he wants to start. Something that's actually become Joint Commission required. Just went through a visit recently. They're starting to say, hey, make sure you ask participants you're working with what type of treatment programs or treatment encounters have been helpful for you in the past. Because there might be a focus on what didn't work, but maybe they'd be like, well, yeah, this was good or this was good. And that could give a lead to what else to try as well. So that going to the barriers, whether it's cultural or whatever it may be, that could be a way to get at that angle. And you could even go a little bit step further of saying, if you had to think of something that would be helpful for you, what would you want to do in your treatment for these issues? Employment is good, but maybe spreading it around a little bit more to say what else they would want to do might allow you to tailor things more specifically. Try not to give away too much about next month's talk, but yeah.
Nice, thank you.
You're getting in the area solution focus there, Dana. I just did a webinar on that one.
Fair enough.
But
fair
it's
enough.
good, right?
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
Because it does help, particularly, and somebody asked about learned helplessness earlier, and all I'll say to that is one of the things that can help is talking about the positive, especially when there's this much tragedy in somebody's life.
Yes.
We don't want to ignore it. That's not right either. But to stay where the client is, and I think it sounds like you're doing a good job on that, Sabrina, and going in the areas that he's willing to talk about and staying there. And then you try and kind of poke holes every once in a while and say, would you be willing to talk about this? And when they say absolutely not, then you go, okay, and come back here to where they feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eventually he'll let you in. Yeah, if he's let you in this far, right?
It
Go
looks
ahead.
like Sabrina has built that rapport with him, that you do have a fairly close relationship with him for what you're saying.
Yes, ma'am, we do.
And this also fits back to what we were talking about, the stages of change, of looking at one behavior at a time sometimes, unless they're intersecting and the client feels comfortable trying to tackle them at the same time, but perhaps at different levels. So appreciating that maybe when it comes to heroin use, for instance, as opiates, he feels that he's in the termination stage. I'm not doing that anymore. That's done, right? Even though I might have some thoughts about it on occasion, especially when I get stressed or whatever it is. But in some other areas, maybe it's about looking at the PTSD that we all can agree he must have and doing an assessment around that. Maybe he's kind of back in the pre-contemplation even around that piece and saying, nope, I don't have any. I don't want to talk about it, even though his ACEs score, as you pointed out, is off the chart. Yeah. But you can't say to somebody, what are you talking about? I'm looking at your ACEs. You have all kinds of trauma. That's not going to work either.
Right. Dr. Aguilar, do you have any insights for Sabrina today?
Yeah, I was actually, thank you, Dee-Dee, for mentioning ACEs, and I was gonna give some kudos to Sabrina for doing that assessment, for doing an ACEs kind of survey with him. And I was actually wondering about that, to the extent you all have spent time talking about the ACEs survey and how much feedback or discussion you had around that. I think specifically because trauma obviously has come forward as a factor in all of this. Or maybe, you just did the assessment and that's kind of where it stayed. I'm just curious, but that's wonderful. I think that you administered it.
I think we administered the assessment, and then of course things started to come up after the administration of the assessment. One being his childhood experience. So he talks after, of course, a lot of resistance when we first started, and I know somebody mentioned like you start poking holes, and yes, he'll start and he'll be like, no, I don't want to talk about that right now, Sabrina. But then the next time he comes in and he'll be like, okay, let's kind of dive into that. So yes, it was the initial assessment, and then it kind of just brought up immediately several different abuse, sexual abuse, and things like that.
Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering, at some point, I don't know if y'all ever do like or have periodic reassessments. Although you wouldn't, reassess for ACEs. If you do another like reassessment, you might want to bring in the ACEs and say, I'm reviewing this. I know you weren't really ready at the time when we first did this to talk about any of these issues, but it might be a good point to try to revisit to see if he would be interested or ready to kind of resolve some of this. I did note, like on your form, he doesn't have a diagnosis of PTSD. And so I don't know, if that's been fully evaluated or not, but it definitely is something to consider. And while trauma might be present, there might not be a readiness to work on it. And that has to be, sensitively dealt with. So, it sounds like you are treading lightly, and that's good, but it's always good to try to revisit it, especially as he's working through so many different things.
Okay. Thank you.
And we also saw actually, let me read here a comment that we have in the chat. Someone says, one congregant we're practicing harm reduction with works here, but refuses to be paid because he will buy drugs. Church elders don't mind providing basic resources like food, clothes, and personal items, but some feel we're allowing him not to make progress and learn financial literacy. Perhaps a peer would be more helpful and effective. So, what do all of you think about that? People who think church elders don't mind providing basic resources, but when we help him, we are allowing him not to make programs. What do you all think about that? If any of you could unmute and talk about that.
I won't go too far in depth, but I'm reminded of Jerome Frank, and he did a lot of work back in the 70s to say whoever is important to that individual will have the biggest impact. It could be from a church if that is a background that's important. It could be a shaman. It could be someone from down the street. But what's important is that that person has a linkage to that individual that's valued. And if so, then that's really an important person. So you don't necessarily have to put a faith on it, but just ask what's important to that individual, and that'll guide you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I also just sent to Pastor Deb that I was interviewed along with some other harm reduction experts for an interview in Sojourn magazine, which is a church-based magazine, looking at harm reduction in church. How do we bring the churches into this and help them to get more comfortable with, stretching those limits. And it was really well done. I'm happy. Maybe I can just send that to you, Andrea or Jasmine, and have that available for anyone who may want to take a look at that.
Absolutely.
I'd love to read that. Thank you, Dee-Dee, so much.
You bet.
We'll consider it great topic, harm reduction in church, for sure. So, Dee-Dee, would you like to give us a quick as possible of the session And the
Sure.
case. I know it's a complex case and we have little time, but at least a couple of takeaways for Sabrina and for participants.
Well, in looking at stages of change, I'll start there first. I think, again, remembering that stages of change are not linear. It is very much a cyclone or the pinball machine in my case. Remembering that even if someone is on the backside of that cyclone, they're still in it. And that's important to remember, that until you say you're no longer on the road, then you are still on the road, regardless of where you are in that stage. And I think particularly for cases like this, it's really important information for them to hear, that no matter how many backslides or how many challenges you have, you can still make those baby steps. And that's really what's important. And how do we help keep folks encouraged and hopeful around those baby steps? We live in a world that wants us to make great strides at one swoop, right? And life just really doesn't happen that way. So I think you're doing some great work, Sabrina, and keep encouraging him to talk and to stretch. And I'm sure you both will find his way. Thanks for bringing the case.
Thank you to you, Dee-Dee. Great topic, great case. And I want to remind you that we'll meet here next month. And please remember to answer that post-session survey, especially if you're looking for your Cs. To all of you, thank you again for participating, and we'll see you next month. Thanks.